If you look back at the early 1970s, the average citizen of Pakistan was actually 50% richer than someone living in India or Bangladesh.
Yeah, they were basically the absolute envy of South Asia at that point.
Exactly. But today, you look at the situation, and that country is teetering right on
Yeah.
the brink of total default. I mean, they're battling inflation that recently peaked at like a staggering 38%.
It's a massive, massive shift.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking you on a journey to unpack one of the most complex, uh, rapid, and honestly misunderstood economic reversals in modern history.
And we're not just skimming the bad headlines today either.
No, definitely not. We have synthesized a mountain of data for you. We've got a comprehensive Atlantic Council issue brief, academic studies on the circular economy framework, an analysis of their path to sovereignty, and this deeply candid policy address by Dr. Ishrat Hussain.
Right, the former state bank governor.
Exactly. And our mission here is to figure out exactly how a nation's wealth collapses like that, and more importantly, the mechanics of how it gets rebuilt.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that reversal. I mean, understanding how an economy goes from being the richest in its region to facing such a severe precipice, it's not just a localized tragedy.
All right, it's bigger than that.
Yeah, it serves as a masterclass in structural economics. So our goal today is to map out the exact mechanisms of this crisis and then look at the highly specific data-backed blueprints for, a potential recovery.
So to really grasp the depth of the current crisis, you have to look at the architectural foundation of the economy, right? Like how radical it shifted over time.
Oh, absolutely. You have to rewind a bit.
Yeah, back in the 1960s, Pakistan was experiencing this massive boom. I mean, despite having very limited natural resources right out of the gate and a highly volatile political foundation, their GDP was growing at an average of 6.8%.
Which is huge.
Right. To give you some regional context, India was only growing at about 4% during that same stretch.
Yeah, and that 1960s growth was largely engineered through two major levers. First, you had highly centralized government-led industrial planning, and second, a massive influx of foreign aid, particularly from the U.S. and oil-rich Middle Eastern nations.
So it wasn't exactly organic growth.
No, the state was heavily involved in directing capital, establishing early industries, managing resources from the top down. It wasn't organic, market-driven growth, but, I mean, for a while, it produced phenomenal top-line numbers.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if they had the blueprint in the 60s and they were outpacing their neighbors by nearly double, the obvious question is, what broke?
Right, how do you go from that to a crisis?
Exactly. How do you go from a 6.8% growth engine to what economists refer to as the lost decade of the 1990s?
Well, the 1990s is where the underlying fragility of that state-led model was really exposed. The global macroeconomic trend at the time, which was heavily pushed by international lenders, was structural adjustment.
Like liberalization and privatization.
Exactly. Liberalization, privatization, deregulation. Pakistan basically followed suit, aiming to modernize and stimulate growth by opening up its markets.
But the execution was flawed.
Deeply flawed. They liberalized the economy without putting the necessary regulatory frameworks in place to protect domestic industries from sudden international shocks.
Wow. So it sounds like they basically opened the floodgates without building a reservoir first.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You suddenly expose local, subsidized businesses to aggressive global competition, and without regulatory buffers, capital just flees.
Precisely. And the
Yeah.
macroeconomic results were just devastating. Economic growth slid to a stagnant 1 to 1.5% per capita.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, domestic investment rates plummeted. And the human cost was severe. Poverty literally doubled during that decade, jumping from 17% to 34%.
That's a staggering jump in just 10 years.
It is. And meanwhile, just to keep the government functioning, external debt doubled from $18 billion to $36 billion.
And, we can't ignore the governance factor here either, because you can't separate an economy from the institutions that actually enforce its rules.
No, you really can't.
The 1990s saw frequent shifts in political regimes, which means you lose any continuity in economic policy. I mean, the sources show that by 1996, Pakistan was declared the second most corrupt nation in the world.
Right, and when leadership changes constantly like that, you get a fractured, short-term approach to development. Investors need predictability.
Right, they hate uncertainty.
Exactly. A deregulated economy combined with deep institutional instability is just a recipe for massive capital flight.
But, okay, historical instability only sets the stage, right?
Yeah.
When we dig into the macroeconomic data today, the true underlying rot of the economy comes from a massive internal pressure cooker.
Yeah, the domestic side of
Right.
things.
And here's where it's really interesting for you listening. Because the root cause of this massive debt spiral isn't just bad trade deals or political infighting.
No.
It is fundamentally a demographic crisis.
It really is. I mean, we often talk about a demographic dividend, right? The idea that a growing population means a massive productive workforce that can just turbocharge an economy.
Like China in the 90s and 2000s.
Exactly. But Pakistan is currently trapped in the inverse of that, a demographic burden. It all comes down to the dependency ratio.
Yeah, let's break down the mechanics of that dependency ratio for you. Imagine two households with the exact same income. Right. But one has 5 young dependents and the other has 2.
Right. Totally different financial reality.
Exactly. The one with fewer dependents can save and invest. The other lives paycheck to paycheck. And right now, a staggering 36% of Pakistan's population is 15 years old or younger.
Which is huge compared to the region.
Right. If you look at India, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka, that number is much lower, sitting between 22 and 25%. Furthermore, Pakistan's working age population is below 60%.
And when less than 60% of your population is of working age and they're supporting this absolutely massive base of young dependents, the immediate casualty is domestic savings.
Because they just have to spend everything to survive.
Exactly. Every rupee earned is consumed by immediate survival needs, food, basic healthcare, housing. There is literally nothing left over to put into a bank.
Wow.
Over the past 5 years, Pakistan's domestic saving rate has hovered around just 1/5 of other South Asian countries.
Just 1/5. And the knock-on effect of that is brutal. I mean, if citizens aren't depositing savings into local banks, those banks have no capital to lend to local entrepreneurs to build factories or to the government to build infrastructure.
Right.
The investment rate just craters.
Exactly. An economy cannot grow without capital investment. If a government cannot fund its basic operations or development projects through domestic savings or an adequate tax base, it's forced to look outward.
Foreign loans.
Yeah. It turns to massive high-interest borrowing. Pakistan began borrowing heavily not to invest in high-return infrastructure, but just to cover its day-to-day fiscal deficits.
Which brings us to the terrifying reality of their current debt servicing. Looking at the 2021 to 2023 crisis period, the numbers are almost hard to comprehend.
They really are.
During that window, the interest payments on public debt consumed nearly 60% of the government's entire revenue.
Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Before the government can pave a single road, fund a single school, or equip a single hospital, 60 cents of every tax dollar collected goes purely to paying interest on past debt.
That is just wild.
To give you some global perspective, international financial institutions consider an interest-to-revenue ratio above 25% to be a severe red flag.
And they hit 60.
Pakistan hit 60.
So if 60% of their revenue is vaporized by interest payments and have almost zero domestic savings, where is all the remaining borrowed money actually going?
Well, the data points to a structural addiction. They are hemorrhaging foreign currency to feed a massive reliance on imported goods.
Right, they buy far more from the world than they sell.
This is the result of a totally failed import substitution strategy. Historically, Pakistan tried to build local industries to replace foreign goods, but they protected those local companies with massive tariffs.
So there was no competition.
Exactly. If a local manufacturer is completely shielded from outside competition, they have zero incentive to innovate, improve quality, or become globally competitive.
They just get comfortable.
Right. They essentially assemble imported parts, call it local manufacturing, and they never learn to export.
Wait, I have to push back here, though. Pakistan is widely known as an agricultural powerhouse. I mean, they have vast tracts of arable land and significant natural resources.
That's true, they do.
So why on earth are they forced to import so much heavy capital and energy?
It's a textbook case of resource mismanagement. Take natural gas, for example. Pakistan actually possesses the 29th largest natural gas reserves globally.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that high.
Yeah. But for decades, the government severely underpriced that gas for domestic consumers and local industries just to win political favor.
Except,
Right. Because it was artificially cheap, it was wildly overused and inefficiently allocated. Now, they are rapidly depleting their own reserves.
and because they didn't invest in domestic infrastructure, they can't pivot easily. I mean, The sources point out they lack adequate domestic oil refineries.
Yeah.
So instead of importing cheap crude oil and refining it locally to replace the gas, they are forced to import highly expensive, fully refined petroleum products.
And that completely drains their foreign exchange reserves. And because that protected manufacturing sector never develops sophistication, they can't build their own industrial machinery.
Oh, so they're importing that too.
Exactly. They are stuck importing heavy capital equipment just to keep their basic, low-value industries running.
There's a comparison in the macroeconomic data from our sources that perfectly illustrates this structural failure, the divergence of Vietnam and Pakistan.
That's a brilliant example.
Right. In the 1990s, these two countries had remarkably similar economic structures, population sizes, and export profiles. But today, a Vietnamese worker's productivity has grown 8 times faster than a Pakistani worker's.
Vietnam is the ultimate counterexample here. They deliberately diversified away from primary low-value exports.
Hmm.
They aggressively attracted foreign direct investment FDI and integrated their labor force into the highly lucrative global electronics supply chain.
While Pakistan remained rigidly stuck on low-value, heavily protected exports like raw cotton and basic textiles.
Right. And when your only exports are cheap shirts, but you have to import expensive refined oil and advanced machinery, the math fundamentally breaks.
And then you expose that broken math to external global shocks. I mean, the system is so precarious that any global disruption just shatters it.
Like the Ukraine war.
Exactly. When the Ukraine war broke out and global energy prices spiked, Pakistan's oil import bill essentially doubled almost overnight, hitting $2.6 billion.
Add to that the catastrophic 2010 floods, which wiped out agricultural yields and caused an estimated $43 billion in infrastructural damage.
Just devastating.
It was. Meanwhile, ongoing political volatility and terrorism concerns caused foreign direct investment, which, remember, is the very thing that saved Vietnam to just flee. Pakistan's FDI dropped from $8 billion in 2007 down to just $3.5 billion in 2022.
Okay, so if the debt is this crushing and the structural problems are this mathematically obvious, the big question on everyone's mind is, why hasn't the government just defaulted and restructured?
It's a fair question.
Right. We see struggling nations restructure their external debt all the time to get breathing room.
Well, their issue is the composition of Pakistan's debt. The data from the Atlantic Council makes it clear a sovereign default would be uniquely catastrophic because over 85% of the government's interest payments actually go to domestic creditors, not foreign bondholders.
Oh, wow. That is a crucial distinction. They owe the vast majority of this money to their own domestic banking sector.
Precisely. Nearly 60% of the government's entire domestic debt is held by Pakistani commercial banks.
And they're borrowing from their own banks.
The government borrows from local banks just to keep the lights on. If the state defaults on that debt, it doesn't just anger some foreign investors in New York or London.
It instantly wipes out the capital base of Pakistan's entire banking system.
Exactly. It would obliterate citizen savings, pension funds, and completely freeze the domestic economy.
So what does this all mean? It means they have virtually no leverage.
None.
To avoid collapsing their own banks, they have to turn to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to get bailout loans just to roll over their external debt obligation.
Right. But as the sources point out, the IMF requires harsh, front-loaded tax increases, currency devaluations, and massive subsidy cuts in exchange for that cash.
And this is where Dr. Ishrad Hussein's policy address really highlights the reality on the ground. Implementing IMF mandates requires a state apparatus capable of actually increasing tax collection and modernizing its economy.
Yeah, you need functional institutions.
But the internal bureaucracy tasked with executing these reforms is, according to the sources, fundamentally compromised.
Yeah, the former state bank governors have been incredibly candid about this. The institutions are plagued by deep structural friction.
Like what?
Well, extreme overstaffing, an absence of technical competence, and entrenched corruption. They actively resist digitization and comprehensive tax surveys.
Why resist digitization, though?
Because a digital, transparent paper trail exposes the massive untaxed black economy. It is an active misalignment of incentives. Many public officials operate with sweeping discretionary powers, meaning a single bureaucrat can decide the fate of a business license based on a whim. In that environment, transparency is viewed as a direct threat to personal enrichment.
Wow. So implementing sweeping macroeconomic reforms is practically impossible when the micro-level execution layer is actively working against you.
It's like trying to upgrade the engine of a car to go faster, while the mechanics are actively siphoning the gas right out of the tank because they make their living selling it on the black market.
That is a great analogy. But despite all of this, the demographic burden, the import addiction, the bureaucratic friction, the macroeconomic blueprints do provide a highly specific, mathematically viable way out.
They do. The focus in the sources shifts from merely diagnosing the rot to aggressively applying structural, evidence-based cures.
One of the most fascinating solutions proposed in the academic study we looked at is integrating a circular economy framework.
Yeah, the CE framework.
Right. We talked about how importing raw materials and energy is bleeding their foreign reserves dry. Well, a circular economy attacks that import bill directly.
Exactly.
For instance, producing aluminum from recycled end-of-life products uses roughly 95% less energy than extracting it from raw ore.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the circular economy isn't just like an environmental initiative, it is a vital macroeconomic defense strategy.
How so?
Well, European models show that aggressive resource looping reduced material extraction by 12% over an 8-year period and cut greenhouse gases by 9%.
That's significant.
Yeah. If Pakistan applied these efficiency models to their heavy industries, they could drastically slash their reliance on expensive, dollar-denominated imported energy and raw materials.
But wait, I have to challenge this. You just told us that foreign direct investment has plummeted and they have basically no domestic savings.
Right.
Building state-of-the-art European recycling infrastructure requires massive upfront capital and imported technology.
Yeah.
How on earth does a country facing rolling blackouts and a dollar shortage actually build this?
It's an excellent point. And the answer is that they can't just copy-paste the European model.
Okay.
They have to tailor it to their informal economy. Pakistan already has a massive undocumented network of informal waste pickers and scrap recyclers.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. The strategy isn't about importing billion-dollar recycling plants. It's about formalizing and subsidizing the existing local networks.
So empowering the people already doing the work.
Exactly. It's about providing microfinancing to local scrap yards to upgrade their smelters, which requires local labor, not foreign capital. By incrementally tightening the loop on steel, plastics, and textiles domestically, you slowly reduce the need to import raw materials without needing a massive influx of FDI.
That makes a lot of sense. You leverage the labor force you already have, but to truly fix the economy, you have to fix the foundation, which loops us right back to the demographic trap.
This is the ultimate linchpin. We established that rapid population growth and a massive dependency ratio basically destroyed the national savings rate.
Right.
The only way to reverse a demographic burden is to radically empower the female population.
Yeah, the current statistics from the sources are really sobering. The formal female labor force participation rate in Pakistan sits at an abysmal 20%.
Which is incredibly low.
The data clearly argues that the ultimate economic fix isn't just manipulating interest rates, it requires aggressive investment in female education and expanding access to credit for women and girls.
And the macroeconomic correlation here is ironclad globally. When a nation increases female education and integrates women into the formal workforce, population growth naturally stabilizes.
Because they have more opportunities.
Exactly. Families shift from single income precarity to dual income stability. Consequently, the ratio of working-age adults to dependents rises.
Just like Bangladesh did.
Yes. Bangladesh executed this brilliantly through targeted. It literally elevates their standard of living back up to par with the rest of South Asia.
It solves the saving crisis, the investment deficit, and the reliance on foreign debt in one unified demographic shift.
It really underscores that economic sovereignty isn't constructed purely in the halls of the central bank.
Right.
Expanding the tax base steadily, rather than crushing citizens with sudden IMF-mandated hikes, and relentlessly redirecting those revenues into education, healthcare, and female labor integration is the only empirically proven way out of the trap.
So to synthesize this massive web for you, Pakistan's economic crisis isn't just about bad inflation headlines. It's a systemic chain reaction.
Yeah, domino effect.
Rapid population growth creates a massive demographic burden that crushes domestic savings. Lack of savings forces the government into a domestic debt spiral where 60% of revenue is eaten by interest.
Right.
To survive, they rely on heavily protected industries that drain foreign currency by importing expensive energy and capital. Meanwhile, a deeply entrenched bureaucracy fights the digitization needed to actually fix the tax base.
But, and this is the hopeful part, by formalizing local resource loops to cut import dependency, and above all, empowering women to flip the demographic ratio from a burden to a dividend, there is a mathematical path back to stability. And that raises an important question, especially regarding how the global community approaches these crises.
Oh,
We are conditioned to view economic bailouts purely through the lens of Western institutions like the IMF, focusing obsessively on spreadsheets, currency valuations, and strict austerity targets.
right. It's the traditional metrics.
But if the fundamental key to rescuing a nation's economy actually lies in its social fabric, in the classrooms and in the empowerment of its women, how much of traditional, purely fiscal international intervention is fundamentally flawed when applied to the developing world?
That is a phenomenal question.
Ah,
What if the ultimate macroeconomic weapon isn't a fiscal policy at all, but social empowerment?
exactly.
It completely reorients how we measure a country's potential to heal.
Hmm.
The true metrics of recovery might not be found in bond yields at all, but in labor force participation and literacy rates.
It really makes you rethink the whole system.
It does.
Uh,
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking past the obvious metrics, and we'll catch you next time.